Welcome to the install guide, everybody. My name is Tim from Tim Stereo Systems. I am going to be your host. Before you get started, I want you to take notice at the bottom of the video that you're playing on. You'll see on the timeline, if you run your finger over there, that it's built into chapters, so you can zoom around all over the video, find what you need. But please make sure you go to the website for all our products and pricing and support. So without further ado, let's get started, and good luck with your install. Before we get started, we need to talk about radio flashing. If you are using a factory Harley radio, it is required to have a radio flash. It will not be covered in this video. However, jump over to our radio flashing video on the how-to videos section of my YouTube channel and follow the steps on there. Now let's proceed with the install. We're going to unbox all the components, and here we're just going to place them on a table. If you're missing a part, I put the part numbers underneath to help you reference those. So now, after we're almost all done unboxing here, let's get started. I'm going to put the fender and tank cover on. And start the disassembly. We're going to remove these Phillips screws. Now, if they're not Phillips, there's going to be an 1/8 inch T-handle hex for removing the windshield. And when you get to that last screw, just be careful not to drop or damage the windshield. You can see that there's no slots on this one, but there are some with slots. You can slide them off before you pull the screws off. Let's put that on a blanket or somewhere to protect it. You can push down on this plastic piece, and this will remove that top air vent assembly. Don't lift it from the top part. They've been known to separate and it can break it. Let's just pull that off and set that right there with the windshield. And next we're going to remove the turn signal lines. Simple clip on the back. So here we're going to remove the grills. We're going to push out on this white tab that's on the back of the grill, and you push out. You can pull that from the front. Try not to use a pry tool. This from the front, it'll damage your interfering. It has a potential anyway. Now we're going to remove these side marker bolts using a 3/16. Now keep these separate from all the other bolts. They are different length. Now, without removing the lower wind deflector, simply take a T25 Torx and get the bottom screw out of there. We're going to do this on both sides. Put the screws in a safe place, and now on the screws exposed underneath where the grill was, just loosen those with the same T25 screwdriver. And then using your belly, rest it on there, loosen with your fingers, and pull it off nicely. Set it on the ground like so, right over where your windshield was. Using a panel removal tool, we're going to remove this metal bracket. It's not on all bikes. It's not going to be reused. You can discard it. Now take that same 3/16 and take these 4 headlight bolts out. As mentioned previously, do not mix these bolts up with the bolts from the side markers. They are different lengths. I'm just going to pop that clip off and get the headlight out. Remove our speaker wire, take our panel tool, remove the wire connected to the speaker pod, and then we are going to loosen these bolts. So the bolts holding the speaker pod on, leave that top one on, so when you remove the other ones, it doesn't just fall off the bike. Let's remove this GPS antenna wire. We're going to clip that zip tie and then just move it out of the way. This way you don't have to pull the GPS antenna off of the actual speaker pod. Let's get these screws out. Go as quick as I can here. remove that speaker wire there. Pop that wire loose on that connects to the USB, and then get those screws out. Let's remove the remaining wires from the radio, and then take that same 3/16 and get the 4-corner bolts off so you can get the radio out of the bike. And once we have those loose, the bolts should stay with the radio. Just leave them in there, pull it out, and we're good. Taking the seat off, it's usually a P3 screwdriver, but this bike specifically had a thumb screw. Little tip, just thumb screw that back in so you don't lose it. The battery tray bolts, we're going to use either 1/2-inch socket or T40 Torx. Using a small flathead screwdriver, pry that little tab and push that whole wire harness forward, and it'll slide right off so you don't break that tab. And I am well aware that there's different designs underneath the seat, but it's the same similar process. Let's just remove all the wire harnesses, get them out of your way, and disconnect them. The vent tube off the gas tank, remove that. In here, we're going to push up on that metal sleeve that's like a fuel line, and then we're going to go around the bike and remove all 4 bolts. Again, they're T40 or 1/2-inch socket. Now lift the gas tank off, use both your legs. Hopefully you didn't fill your gas tank full before you did this. Here we're just going to remove this center backbone piece that covers all the wiring. See, it can be kind of a struggle. Sometimes there's zip ties holding them down. Not a big deal. So next we're going to take off the saddlebags and the side covers. Not only is it nice to take them off and get things out of your way, but it's essential if you decide you want to run rear wiring, adding a lid kit. So right here we take off the ECU, or move it out of the way, but this one was kind of jumping in my way, so I zip tied it out of the way for myself. You can do the same. Just cut that zip tie off when you're done. So putting power wire in, we're not going to connect it to the battery as of yet. We're just getting it tucked in there. Leave about 5 or 6 inches of slack, so when we get that in there, and for service reasons, you don't want to have it where you can't access the fuse. Let's just fish this power wire up the backbone. Once you have that in the rear harness tucked in there, we can clip the wire tray back in place. What you want to do is leave 15 inches of slack hanging out the back of the wire tray so we can tuck that in the battery compartment. If you see on the side picture here, I have shown you how we take the pins out of this big harness plug, and this will allow you to fish the wire in through that neck assembly nicer. You just pull it off, and then you pinch them together, and then you electrical tape the ends, so when you fish that through, it's a lot easier than forcing that big plug through. And then once you have that through, take the tape off and put the pins back in. And then just zip tie up a couple spots here just to clean it up. And we now have our rear wire and our power wire ran to the front. So notice the orientation of the power wire and the negative wire into the battery. See how it's not sideways or any other orientation? When you put the battery tray on, there's an opening. And then on this part, this shows you where to put the rest of the rear harness. And we're not going to be using it in this video, but that's for future use if you decide to get a lid kit. Tighten this down. Now always remove the negative first and then the positive. Connect the positive and then go back to the negative. If you have accessories on the bike that require battery connections, make sure that the power wire is the bottom connection closest to the battery. It's very important. Put the saddlebags on, side covers back on. Put the gas tank on the same way we took it off. It's easier if you thumb in a couple screws first before you connect the fuel line. So put those in. Let's connect our vent line, connect the wire harnesses, and push up on that metal sleeve on fuel line. The fuel line will click right back in place. So now that we have that on, put the seat back on. The entire rear of the bike is completed. We're going to mount the amp to the amp bracket. You see how the cutout of the amp bracket lines up with the serial number of the amp. Make sure it's in that orientation. We're going to do the supplied screws with the amp and just get them all started. And if you orientate the amp bracket to the side, the washers won't fall through that little gap where the mount sits. Purpose for the mounts is there's different headlights and layouts that require us to have to adjust the amp around a little bit to get things to fit inside the bike. Generally speaking though, put it in the center and then you make sure that the amp bracket is pushed all the way back, and you'll see the arrow like I point there. So next we're going to get this amp inside the bike. And by doing so, we're going to slide it in from the front. And make sure all our wires are out of the way. But before we do that, I'm going to show you how this lays out inside the bike. And just make sure that the curved part of the amp bracket is faced the front. If we look underneath, there's these little eyelets, and those line up with these holes here in the bracket. We want to make sure that those all line up together. And when you get it in the right spot, it'll just kind of click in place and kind of hold there. And once that's there, if you look to the side, you can see the anchor points of the amp bracket go right to the holes inside the interfering bracket. And it makes a nice solid mount inside the bike. So the amp essentially sits upside down. So we're going to pause it right here. Before we put it in as well, you're going to see the amp wires, we're going to aim right here. And that way the wires don't get pinched and they're easy access for later. Then right here, the amp wires will end up there. So once it's in the bike, you'll see that they're at the bottom. So make sure that you orientate that correctly. Now we got the amp bracket in, let's thumb the screws in, get them tightened down. Double check and make sure that those wires are in that spot. It's very, very, very important. Because if they're not in that spot, then it can make things kind of a bear later when you go to put the radio in. On here, we're going to insert and plug in the power wire. When you tie this wire up, there's a little wire hanging off of that main power wire. That is a remote turn on. Leave that hanging loose for now. We're going to connect that up a little bit later. This is just your main power wire, just a single zip tie, and then just give it a nice snug, and it looks nice and neat and up and out of your way. Putting the radio on, you see how I push the wires down to make sure that the amp wires aren't in the way of the radio, and tighten those down with a 3/16. And let's jump over to the speakers. A T25 torque screwdriver is what can be used to take these out. I got impatient, so I used my impact gun. My little 1/4-inch drive impact can be used. If you have one, feel free to use it. And we will not be using these screws. There's a supplied set of screws that comes with the kit. Use those to mount. For now, we're going to remove these terminals and get that 5 1/4-inch speaker from Harley out of there. We're going to drop in our 6 1/2s. Make sure the white one connects to the red positive. Slide it on in there. Now, you may not know this, and it's a fun fact, but the Harleys, all the smaller plug terminals are actually positive and the bigger plug terminals are actually negative. So we're going to tighten these down. But see, these are the Phillips screws that we supplied in this kit. Careful, if you use a drill gun, you don't want to slip and run a hole through the speaker. I'm going to plug that in. Again, the white one is the positive, the black one is the negative. And I should say that the smaller one is positive and the bigger one is negative. Now, it works the same in tour packs if you guys are putting tour packs on. For a quick second, we're going to thumb that screw in. And then we're going to go around and thumb screw in everything else. And you get to the last one, then you start tightening it down. If you look here, you'll see that this is a larger hole. This is your interfering adjustment location. If you pull the interfering towards the headlight and then tighten down the bolts, it'll make things a little tighter on the outer fairing. And just nice and snug, guys. You don't have to go over tight with these. It's not load bearing. I'm going to do the other side. We're just going to tighten these screws down. And if for some reason you strip one out and you need a replacement, 1/4-20 size. So if you need to replace one for some reason, just make sure you use stainless. Right, we're going to put on our T-harness, and we're going to describe the T-harness first. So there's the layout, and there's your remote. Here's your input harness, the output of the amp, and the DSP connection. There's 2 DSP connections. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this plug here and separate it, and then that other plug that you disconnected will actually plug into the DSP as well. And that blue connection that connects to that hanging wire underneath inside the fairing connects to here. So the input harness is what we call it, connects to these inputs on the amplifier. This is the side facing the front of the bike. And then this is the part that we kind of looped around on the back, and that's your output, and that connects to this side of the harness. So the DSP main connection, obviously not, but the output plugs into these 2 plugs, and just take very close notice to the white and gray are the fronts and the purple green are the rears. And you can actually take your fingernail and pull back a little bit of sheathing to see what colors are which on the actual amp. So again, you connect the blue power wire, you connect the DSP connection, and you connect the main connection. This is where things connect. And just giving you an overview of how it lines up. So let's get it plugged in. So we're going to put in the T-harness, plug it in here, make sure that it lines up there, and we're just going to snug it in there, and that clip will close and it'll pull in tight. Right here is the bike's remote turn on. We're going to just plug that in, and we're going to fish this up underneath here so make it a little nicer. You can see there's a little jumper plug, so if you have accessories to plug into there, it can still be used. Now we're going to plug in our USB plug, which is the black one. Notice the tab faces up on that one. The antenna wire, that faces down. And the blue GPS antenna, also that tab faces down as well. Just get it tucked in there nice. And there we go. So reconnect our speaker wires, so those are plugged in. And then if you look here, we're going to see our input harness, and it's a little out of frame, I apologize. But basically you plug the input harness like shown. Run a zip tie around right here to help clean things up. Put a zip tie there, clip that off, and then we're going to zip tie all the wires hanging off up to this harness that comes factory on the bike. Wrap it around the plastic clip. Try not to connect it right to the wires where they come out, because you can pull a pin out. So tucking it up right here is probably going to be your smartest bet. And then take all the remaining wires. We're going to run a zip tie over on this area. Again, I apologize, it's a little bit out of frame. Right here, this connection is not used. So this next step, we're going to take that rear main harness that we ran through the bike along with the power wire. We're going to plug it into the add-on rear there. Again, it's out of frame, my apologies. Once we have that there, we're just going to plug them right into the amplifier. Make sure front and rear are lined up correctly. You can see it's just trying to keep the wires straight, get them all tucked around, and you just kind of loop them around behind where that headlight mount bolt spot goes. And if you see here, I'm just kind of tucking the wires up, twisting the wires, just get them tucked up so they're nice and zip tied out of the way nicely. When we do this, make sure that the DSP plugs are in a manner so it's easy to plug them in when we're done. Best to watch this and then do it, and then rewind and watch it again. So now we're nice and snugged up here. I've already plugged in and did it off frame, but plugged in that little blue wire that comes off of the power wire. That's our remote turn on. Got the zip tie. As you can see, the connections are actually kind of nicely done in there. Now we're just going to hook up the DSP. On the actual plug itself on the DSP, you're going to plug in the big one, and the little one you're going to plug into the one that's labeled M. That's for Mirrors. That's the line that we're putting in here on this specific model. If you're in a Legatia or SE line, look for the L/SE one. We're going to test it. We're going to turn on the ignition. You see the blue light pop up. And then we're going to set the radio up. So select home, and then select the gear icon. Select audio settings. And turn the bass and treble up all the way, and then select volumes. We're going to turn off the speed volume. So scroll to the bottom and select speed volume off, because if that's on, and it could damage the system if you're playing too loudly and you go to take off. Let's plug our phone in, connect our Amazon Music up. Jumping on a trampoline. Now let's put the bike back together, shall we? Notice the 4 points. And now what I want you to notice here is there's two little black tabs that stick off the corners, and they go into that side vent. See the hole in the corner of the side vents there? Make sure that those fit into that location for you. And we'll just finger in a couple screws here just to kind of get them started. Get everything started and then tighten them all down. And just double check before you step away from the headlight. Make sure that those two little black tabs are inside the vents. So before we put the fairing on, we're going to take the sound deadening material that showed up, and we're going to clean off the area. And I like to use adhesive promoter, but you can use rubbing alcohol as well. Just clean that off nicely, and we're going to see how it's oriented with kind of the dented line of the fairing. I'm just going to lay it across that spot so you cover as much of that turn signal wire as you can. Then reassembling, it's just the opposite of taking it apart. Push it up against your belly, reach over and loosely put those T25 screws in. Then we're going to push that part of the fairing up and then tighten that down, and it'll pull it nice and snug so it holds in there all together. After we get those in, this is important, finger these in, these strip very easily, and then tighten them down. Try not to force them in. Just to reiterate, these screws are a different length than the ones in the headlight. Make sure you didn't get those mixed up. Let's reconnect our turn signal wires. Let's test everything, make sure everything turns on, the horn works, signals work, before we finish putting everything together and realize we left something unplugged. We take the upper vent, get that on there, and if you have a slot in your windshield, this is nice. You can thread those on, and sometimes you'll see there's some alignment issues. Sometimes with the fairing might be off a little bit to get these screws in there, but do not force it in with a screwdriver. These screws strip extremely easily. And what's nice about the head windshields with the slots on them, they just slide right on. Make sure the washers are on top, and then tighten them down. I only use this windshield as an example. This customer actually had one without the slots, so after this video is done, I put the correct windshield back on. And put the grills back on, make sure those gaskets are on there all the way around the edges, and then push it in tight. And guys, that concludes our installation, but we need to do the engine codes. And on your left handlebar, you're going to see your trigger. When I say trigger, this is the one I'm referring to, is right here. So anything pertaining to pressing buttons, it refers to this. So click and hold, and while you're holding, I want you to turn on your ignition to run, and then let go of the trigger. It's going to come up with a diag screen. You want to click it one time real quick, and you're going to see ECM pop up. And then to clear the code, you hit press and hold. You'll see the code pop up. You press and hold again. And then when you see clear pop up, you click it real quick. And then you're going to see ECMN. To cycle through the other codes, click one at a time. There's the BCM. Do the same process for that. The speedo and the radio. The radio will say yes, so don't panic when you see Y under radio and you cannot get it to clear. But once the codes are cleared, you can turn off the bike, turn it back on, and it takes you back to the regular odometer layout.